I'm excited to be here, and I'm just going to share a little bit about a personal journey, and then we're actually going to talk more later about some questions that you might have, because I think this is a really important topic. One reason that I wanted to talk about shame is because I'm a therapist at the Counseling and Testing Center, and I have so many students coming in with feelings of shame, and it can be many different kinds of shame. Sometimes it's academic shame because they're not performing how they wanted. Sometimes it's about sexual shame. Sometimes it's about shame of religion, of maybe having not as much faith as they want to have. There's so many things that can come. And so I just wanted to talk about it. So I wanted to share part of my journey. And this story takes place a long time ago for me when I was 18 and I had just came to college. And I know last time I talked about just my general freshman year was a mess, and I alluded to a breakup that I had, but I didn't give many details because I thought I'd save those for the second time. So basically what happened was we met at summer camp that summer, and I was reluctant to get into a relationship. But he was very persistent and very charming, and he said all the right things, like all the right things. He knew exactly what to say. He knew how to woo my family. And so after a while, I was like, okay, maybe. And we started hanging out more, and sooner or later, I felt like we were really in love at the time of what I think I thought being in love meant. And there were some signs that it wasn't a super healthy relationship, but again, I was only 18 and I didn't really know much better. And one big thing that happened was I had some sexual boundaries, and we had actually talked about it, but then they kept getting pushed farther and farther past what I had thought I was going to be able to uphold. I think I had a higher level of confidence in my own abilities to resist temptation. And I think when you throw in attraction and being in love with someone, sometimes it's really hard to figure out how to maintain those boundaries. And I think the biggest part that was difficult for me is that no one was talking about it. I had friends and we maybe were dating people, but we didn't sit down and talk about like, hey, so like, where are you guys at? What are you guys doing physically? And how do you feel about it? And do you ever feel bad after you do something? And what does that mean? And like, no one was talking about it. So this was just me holding on to all this internal, honestly, like shame about it because of a lot of messages I received when I was younger that I felt a lot of my value had to do with like being pure because of purity culture and things like that. So basically what really ended up happening was eventually I got pushed past a point I really didn't want to go to. And I don't want to go into great detail just because that's not what this session is about. I don't want to tell people what their boundaries should be. I think it's a very personal decision. I think my desire is that people spend some time thinking about what their personal values are. And then I think I could have done better at figuring out practical ways at how to have better boundaries. And also maybe talking about it with other people to have more support. But yeah, and it wasn't really consensual. So it was this very difficult thing where like I felt like I didn't have a say in what happened. And then by then it was like too late. I couldn't go back in time and like erase what happened. So I had a lot of signs of depression after this happened. We stayed together for a while and I was still struggling with like, sometimes I'd say, well, it already happened. Might as well do whatever now because I can't even say I haven't done this now, you know. So I had a lot of that happening. I think sometimes with shame, even if it's academic shame or if it's religious shame, if you feel like you let somebody down, you're like, well, I might as well just throw in the towel. I think sometimes we can have that reaction, which, I think back, if I could go back in time, I think I would try to think differently. But at the time that was happening a lot. And the really sad thing was I was like desperately trying to hold on to this relationship that wasn't working. Our values started to become more and more different. And I think there were signs that it was really unhealthy. One big sign was that one time I found out something that he had done that I wasn't okay with. And in order to show me that he felt really bad, he punched a sign and broke his hand.
Wow.
You know, and now I'm like, what was I doing? If my daughter was dating someone who did that, I would be like, get out, you know? But at the time I was like, I'm stuck in this relationship because not only do I love him, but we've gone past physical boundaries, and now who's gonna date me? Like, I had all these really strong thoughts about it. And so I just stayed in the relationship, which seems so absurd now. Like, I would be raising big red flags to my clients and stuff. And then sometimes they'd be like, oh, he didn't hit me, you know, and he felt really bad. He was crying, you know, or whatever. So I'm like embarrassed to say that out loud, but yeah, it was bad. So then eventually what happened was he actually ended up breaking up with me, I think like in January or something of my freshman year. And then I was just devastated because I felt like I was a failure. I felt like I can't get this time back. I can't get my physical like sexuality boundaries back. Like, it's too late. And I got really depressed. I didn't leave my dorm room, I think, for like a week straight, except to like maybe eat once or something. I lost like 10 pounds in a really, and I wasn't a big person, so I like lost tons of weight. And the biggest thing is that I didn't tell anybody. So I like kept it to myself, and I walked around, but unfortunately, like, he didn't keep his mouth shut. So some people found out about certain things, and I knew people were talking about me. And so I just felt like I walked around with like my head hanging really low. And prior to coming to college, I was religious vice president of my senior class. Like, I was very religious. I would like speak up front, and I worked at summer camp, and I was always like feeling like I was a good person. And then all of a sudden I started to question, am I a good person anymore? Like, can I be a role model for kids? And so it was just this really big, huge, like, darkness in my life at that time. And I just really feel for people who could be feeling similar to me about whatever it is. If it's not the same kind of situation, it could be something similar where maybe your identity is getting threatened because of either a behavior that you had or something that happened to you. And so I wanted to share my story, and then also like how I came out of it. So for me, it wasn't immediate. It was definitely like a journey that I went on for a while, where I was like struggling with identity and how to even like help my future self with boundaries. Like, that was still a struggle I think I had after that because of everything. And a big thing that I had was like, am I worthy? Like, am I gonna find anyone who wants to marry me? Like, I feel like lesser of a person. I feel like unworthy to like work at summer camp because I'm not a good role model. Like, all this stuff was happening. So eventually over time, things got better. I actually ended up talking to one of my friends, and that was a huge, huge moment for me where I started accepting myself more, because she didn't say, oh, shame on you, you know. She was very much like, I wish you would have told me sooner. That was her reaction, because she wished she could have been there for me, you know. So like, luckily I had that response. I know some people could have a negative response, but I think a lot of times really good friends want to be there for you through difficult times. And now that I'm looking way back in time, because this was 18, and now I'm married and I have 2 kids, and I just want to go back in time and hug myself and just try to take some of those shameful thoughts and change them into something healthier and more productive. And I called one of my friends, my really good best friends, and I asked her, because she had a really difficult time in undergrad for different reasons, but she had a lot of shame too. And I said, hey, I'm doing this presentation today. What would you want to hear when you were in undergrad? Is there like a message you wish somebody would have told you? And she, because of the situation she went in, she's like, I just wish somebody would have told me that my worth is just as much as it was before what happened. And when she said that, I was like, yes, that's what I wish someone would have said to me, or just said it in an audience where they were like, your worth is the same. It's not different, because I held on to that for such a long time. So if any of you are feeling shame about something that you've done or a situation that you're in, and you're feeling alone in that, I hope maybe sharing a story can help you feel less alone, and also help question that thought of, if you feel like you're not worthy, that you are still worthy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I know, I'm sure that takes a lot to get as vulnerable as you just did, and to share about, you know, your past and things that you've gone through. I think it's interesting how, like, being Adventist or just being Christian in general, you grow up in certain settings, your parents don't really talk about stuff like this. And if anything, the one thing that they tell you, or the one thing that they try to teach you, is just don't do it. Right? And it's not like they actually try to have conversations. It's not like we were brought up in, for many of us, it's not like we were brought up in how to deal with certain things, or, why we should, or how we should navigate, these kinds of situations. And so I think sharing your story actually probably gives a lot of clarity to some people. And I totally get that, because I think when it comes to the issue of relationships, I do think that is one of those things that every person needs to navigate for themselves and learn, how to deal with it. But it's kind of the result of, what happens when, there's shame involved, and how to deal with it, because, the big thing about shame is you don't want to talk to anybody about it. And so when that happens, I feel like you end up in a darker hole, because you don't feel comfortable enough to be able to share that with other people. And so one of the questions that was actually brought in, and I think this is actually really interesting, and I think this would make a good conversation starter for us, which is shame and depression the same thing?
Ooh, good question. I don't think that they're the same thing, but I think they often coexist. I think that shame often leads to depression. I think that sometimes people feel shame about being depressed, but I think you can also be depressed without shame. But I think that they often coexist. I think I wouldn't be surprised at all if most people felt shame about being depressed. Sometimes it's just about like their functioning level, where they feel like I should be functioning better, so I feel shame just about being depressed. And sometimes there could be outside circumstances like what I went through, where my shame was definitely a precursor to my depression. I think the shame kind of happened first, and then my depression followed. So depression usually is defined by having various symptoms. So for one thing, it's your functioning level just decreases in a lot of areas. So academic problems, relational problems, withdrawing from other people. Sometimes it's about like lack of self-care. So when depression gets really bad, often people stop going to class, they'll stop taking showers, they'll stop feeding themselves, or they'll overeat. So because they don't care, because depression, they'll start either overeating or undereating. Sleep's also a factor. So like if you're struggling with falling asleep or staying asleep, or sleeping all the time. That was one big symptom I had, was like I would just nap like any day. Didn't matter. I was just like, if I'm sleeping, I can pretend like nothing happened, because when I'm asleep, I don't feel anything. So that was like a big sign, and my appetite got really low. So, but there's also levels of depression. So someone's may not be as severe as somebody else's. Mine was pretty like instant severe for a while, and then I think it got better. Luckily didn't stick there for too long, but yeah, there's definitely symptoms like that. And shame, they're not the same thing, but I think they often coexist.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like one causes the other. They, like you said, they coexist, but I feel like they go vice versa, in the sense that one can cause the other, and it reciprocates in that sense.
Yeah.
One of the other questions that you and I actually set up, and I think we'll find a way to transition between some of the questions that we've already come up with, and then intertwine, whatever the word is. We'll mix in some of the questions that they brought in, but I feel like a good way to kind of mix into this is. This is one of the questions we came up with. It says, I'm continuing to deal with the same struggle, and I continue to make the same mistake over and over again. Like, what can I do? And I feel like that's a very general kind of like blanket statement, but I'm sure that many people here, have something that they're dealing with, something that they feel shame towards, and, kind of navigating on how to go about it.
So if you continue to act in a way that's against your values, I think a lot of times there's some benefit coming from it. So sometimes it may be functioning as a coping strategy. So sometimes we have certain behaviors that maybe we're not proud of or that we're not comfortable with, but it's providing us a coping strategy. So then a lot of times, like in session with clients, we'll try to figure out what's an alternative coping strategy that we can implement. It takes a while sometimes to find one that's effective, because especially if the coping strategy is really effective. So for instance, like a really hard coping strategy to replace is like drug addiction, because it's very effective, because it's very potent and it changes your whole body, and so that can be very hard to get out of. So anything that's causing you avoidance or relief, things like that, it's important that you find other coping strategies that help. And then there's a lot of behavioral changes you can do if you haven't tried that. I think changing things like location, changing things like access can be helpful if you have vulnerability enough to have an accountability person that you can talk to about it. If it continues to persist, a lot of really severe problems will start to have really intense consequences. And sometimes some people, it takes getting to a really bad place to finally make changes. But like I said, a lot of the time, because you're not changing because you're getting something from it. So a lot of times in therapy, we try to figure out, what is this doing for you? Obviously, it's not within your values. So why do you continue? It's kind of a mystery. Like, why are you doing something you don't think is good? It's because of something. So like for me, I'll just say this example, like, why was I crossing my physical boundaries? Didn't I know what they were? A big part of that was I was scared if I didn't do it, he would leave me. That's not good. But 100%, that was a big factor in me having a difficult time expressing my boundaries. And so I think if I would have acknowledged that more and talked about it with someone to be like, hey, I don't think this is a healthy thought. Maybe I could have worked through it more. So I think understanding like what is the underlying motivation and is that a healthy motivator or can we think differently about it? I think this is a difficult question because unfortunately I wish I had like a miracle answer to give, but I think it's much more complicated and probably would take a while if it's a problem that's existing for a long time. So I would definitely recommend going to therapy or talking to someone else, or if it's something that's not significantly impacting your life, do the behavioral changes and do your own self-exploration to figure out what's underneath it and how you're benefiting from it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like I resonate with that personally as well, because I think at the same time I've seen in my life that there are certain things that I'd like to say, I wanna stop doing. But I think the way you explain it, it's like it's a process, right? It's not something that just happens overnight. You just flip a switch and suddenly you're healed, right? It's actually something that you have to explore, finding ways that actually works best for you. And it seems like it's different from person to person, correct?
Yeah, I've heard of people who recognize something and instantly change their behavior, and that's great. But a lot of people's stories don't look like that. And sometimes it's like small successes, and then they backslide again, and then another success. And then, I think focusing on what you can control and focusing on small victories and like working towards what you want to be and not getting stuck in shame. I think my fear for a lot of people is that they'll get stuck in shame to the point where they don't put any effort into change anymore. So I think that's like a big time to recognize like, oh, I'm recognizing I'm starting to be stuck in shame, and now I'm not even putting forth behavioral changes. So, and I think that's something that's great to process either in a journal or with a friend or in therapy.
Yeah. I think it's about celebrating, the little victories. The fact that we're actually actively trying to work on ourselves in of itself is a victory. Because as you alluded to, if we just let ourselves go, then we've given into that same thought that we aren't good enough, or that we're giving into those negative thoughts. So I think that's really powerful. I guess one of the things that I'd like for us to talk about. And feel free, if there's any questions that you see that have been submitted that you want to address right now, feel free to cut me off. I'm just playing moderator right now, so we'll see where we go from here. But one of the questions that I was thinking that I think would be really good is, what if our shame is linked to trauma, and how can we best navigate that? Because I'm sure for many people that's actually something that's very prominent in their life, and navigating through that, I'm sure, isn't easy.
Yeah. Ooh, this is a loaded question. There is a high prevalence of people having shame attached to a trauma, especially sexual trauma. A lot of times people will, in order to feel like they have maybe some control, is to think that maybe there's some blame attached to what happened. I've worked with a lot of clients with trauma. I think it was really eye-opening when I started working at the CTC. I was like, maybe, because I know the statistics are really high on people that have had, especially like sexual trauma. I think it's 1 in 4, like something like that. And I remember being like, oh, it's probably not that here on campus, right? And then I started asking more and more people, like in the intake session, that's one of the questions we ask. And it's a lot. it's a lot of people. Like, I would probably say, like, very likely that quite a few people in this room have had trauma, or trauma, and then specifically sexual trauma. And I think there can be so much shame attached to it. And sometimes it's good in therapy. A lot of times, like, my job is kind of to just challenge that shame, and say, like, where is this coming from? And then sometimes it's also about, like, if you're a kid, if you're little, if you didn't have consent, if these things were involved, then, like, you were really, like, that's not okay, And sometimes all I do in session is be like, what happened to you is not okay, and it's not your fault. And that's what people really need to hear.
Wow.
A lot of the time. I think if you're on the other end of the spectrum and you feel like you were more involved in what happened, I feel like people can carry around that shame because maybe they feel like it'll protect them from doing it again. Or maybe because by carrying shame, somehow it, is protective. And I think that most likely it's also causing a lot of other problems in life, like avoidance of intimacy, and kind of like the video said, like it can lead to like anger problems. And like I said earlier too, that like I think I love my favorite part of that video that we showed was that it said, sometimes it's not as helpful to be like, oh, you're a wonderful person, and it's more helpful to say, hey, we are all messed up, right? So acknowledging that and taking responsibility, but then letting go of the shame. I think there's a very big difference between taking responsibility and feeling shame about it. So being able to come to some kind of resolution there. Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful. That's really great. I think, man, this is supposed to be helpful for other people. I definitely feel like you're speaking to me, and a lot of what you're saying right now is definitely things that I want to keep in mind, and I hope that we take in mind as well as we deal with our own things. Everyone has a different path. Everyone has something that's gone in their life. But I do appreciate these helpful tips that you're giving. I feel like this is one of these questions that I would like for us to talk about. But before I get to that, I don't know if there's anything on this list that you would like to tackle right away.
I haven't even read them all. A couple ones talk about friends and how to help someone else with shame. And I feel like sometimes the best thing you can do is like let them know, like, hey, you can tell me anything. I love you, I care about you, like I'm a safe person. And they may not tell you right away, but just having that confirmation of like, hey, just so you know, like I'm here for you. That means a lot. And they may come back to you later and say like, hey, they said they were a safe person, I'm ready now. And if they're not ready, that's okay. It takes time sometimes to feel safe, especially if they haven't felt safe around other people. So I would say that's my biggest tip, is just like maybe even verbally or texting or someone and just expressing like, hey, if you ever need anything, like I'm here, and like you will always be my friend. There's nothing that, well, maybe not say nothing, but there's very few things that I think would be relationship threatening. Yeah.
I think it's just realizing that we're not alone and that we actually have a support system.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to say, I'm the only one feeling this, no one understands me. But I feel like that's just far from the truth. It's actually part of those shame, that part of that shame and the lies that we tell ourselves that we are alone. But it's good for us to like open our eyes and actually look at the surroundings, if we're able to power through and actually see that we actually have people around us. And I think there's power in community. So
Ooh, the other tip is vulnerability, like elicits vulnerability. So if you feel like your friend's struggling with something and maybe you feel like being direct isn't going to be helpful, share your own struggle and then be like, hey, can I talk to you about something really sad or really difficult? And then afterwards be like, how are you doing? Do you want to talk about anything? And then it's like, sometimes if you're like, whoa, they just shared something vulnerable, now I feel safer because of how that's a dynamic that definitely has happened a lot.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah, y'all, come on. Like, I think that's really great. I think we need to actually take advantage of that and be a friend to our friends who, whether we see them struggling, if you're struggling yourself, I definitely think that's a great tip to be able to embrace and actually open up a little more and be able to share, because you never know what someone else is going through.
Yeah.
All right, so there are two questions that I would like for us to talk about that have been submitted before we go. Because we have about 9 minutes. But one of the questions that I have, I'd like for us to tackle on, and it's the following one. It says, as an LGBTQ individual, how can I feel less ashamed of who I am and my way of loving?
Ooh. Yeah, I think that when it comes to self-acceptance, it's a very internal journey, but I think we're also very affected by external factors. So I would say for sure, if there's a way to get more support with people that support you and that you feel unconditional acceptance for, like that's a big step in being able to value yourself. So I know that is a lot harder said than done, but I think that that's something that's really important, is having people in your life that you feel like you can be yourself around. And if that's not a possibility, if you're having a hard time finding that, like come to the Counseling Testing Center, because we're 100% like there to talk to anybody. And I think that there's a lot of messages that might be directed at you, but I think that you don't have to hold on to those, you know. I think part of that is being in a religious community where like there's a lot of variability on what people's values are. And I personally have seen the harm in people imposing their values on other people. And it's really painful, and I know that that's a big struggle. So I think there is some definite importance in having people supporting the journey, and also learning how to navigate what things you take in and what things you don't, which is difficult, especially if it's given to you by people that that you care about or you want their approval, and maybe they're not on the same page. Yeah, I think that this is a really important topic that is 100% not talked about enough. So I'm glad that the question is talked about. And I think as a whole, I think even being in like a Christian institution, like we don't do a good job of it. I think a lot of people pretend like it's not happening, or they don't want to talk about it because no one else is talking about it. So I think that if there was more of a voice, like that would be more accepting. Because when you think about shame, a lot of times shame is increased when people hide and when they don't talk about it. And then what happens is people feel like they get a message that's saying that we don't care. And I know a lot of people that do care, but they don't talk about it and they don't express it. And so like, I would like to say that I'm a safe person, you know, but I think that if there was more conversation, I think that would lead to more feeling of acceptance. Yeah. But it unfortunately like isn't happening as fast as I would like it to.
Yeah. I think this is an issue that this is one of those issues that when it comes to the church, because I feel like there's so much misinformation, I feel like it's something that our church is scared to talk about, which is why it ends up being swept under the rug and it's not addressed. And I think it definitely takes a toll, you know. And what I just want to say is, I think one of the most important things is to surround, and I'm a huge advocate about this, and when it comes to everything, is just surround yourself with a good community. If having people who can love on you, who can support you, who can help you deal, you know, with your life, and who can unconditionally support you and love you, I think that's what's so important, because I think it's so easy to feel like you're alone, to feel like you're the only one experiencing this, and not being able to be true to yourself. Mm-hmm. And my hope is for all of us, you know, no matter what, that we are able to accomplish that. That's our goal as a campus here on Andrews, is to be unconditionally loving, unconditionally accepting, and supportive of one another, no matter what our background is, no matter where we come from, no matter what we're going through. That is the goal. And if you have felt this way, you know, where you felt like you haven't been able to do that, like, I'm sorry, and I hope that we can do better. You know, I think it's recognizing that we can do better and be able to do that. And if you don't have that support system, like you said, right, go to CTC, find that support system, because I feel like that's so important. As a closing question, we alluded to this, is since our church doesn't talk about a lot of topics, and not just Adventism, just a Christian church in general, right? Like, Christianity doesn't do the greatest job of addressing certain issues, doesn't do the greatest job of addressing shame. But I guess one of the questions that was asked is, like, what if our shame has been caused by the church? What can we do as Christians or recovering Christians? You know, how can we navigate if the church is actually the source of where our shame comes from?
Yeah, that happened to me, 100%. I'm a PK, and my mom worked for an Adventist school, so I feel like I've heard like every type of sermon and all kinds of like guilt trips, and some were very well intentioned. And sometimes even the most well-intentioned sermon or something can be really like laying on the shame. So I think there's 100% people that have been damaged by the church in this room, including myself, even if it wasn't intentional. I think, oh man, how much time do we have? Okay, so yeah, like one example is like specific to why I started having shame was someone in my church. This was back in high school. It was like my friend's mom or something, and she was someone involved in the church and things, and she came up to me because I was dating someone, and like we hung out and stuff. And anyways, she came up to me and was just like, your body's like a present. And she goes, and when you unwrap it, like you can never put it back together.
Mercy.
And like at the time, I remember feeling very attacked. Like I was like, for one, you don't know anything about my relationship. I haven't talked to you about it. And I knew she was trying to protect me for some reason, but I interpreted from that, like if I cross my boundaries, that's it for me. Like, and I honestly know she loved me, but it was so harmful to me. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of messages that are really unhealthy and that actually produce a lot of shame. And for me now, I'm just like, I wish I could go back in time and be like, no, that wasn't okay. And I wish I would have been like, excuse me? But I think challenging whatever messages you received and saying, does this track with what I think God is? Does this track with what I personally believe? And if it doesn't, reject it. That's easier said than done. But I think that don't just accept what a pastor tells you because they're a pastor. Don't just accept what the community is doing because everyone else is doing it. Like eventually that's going to catch up with you if it's not meshing with your own personal values. There's kind of a few options you can take in this situation. So either you can be the change you want to see in the church, basically, and just like be like, you know what, I'm still going to exist here, but I'm not happy with the decisions and I'm going to challenge them when I can. The other option is obviously like, start questioning like what you believe and where you want to be, and recognize that one bad experience isn't representative of the whole.
Yeah. Wow.
And there's a lot of great people within the church that will support you and love you, and there's also people that may be dealing with a lot of inner turmoil and might do harmful things, not intentionally. So I think it's like a big thing. Did you want to add something? I feel like you might have some good thoughts on this. I'm
gonna try to keep it short. All right, we're gonna let you guys out on time. I hope. I guess I would say is like absolutely. I completely agree with everything that you said. I'm very much of the mindset that if the church isn't living up to what it's supposed to be, fix it. But it's a lot easier said than done because that's not my story. And I, as a pastor, I'm trying to be a part of that change. I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to, build people up. But I feel like it starts with the individual. And I think it's a very personal choice that everyone has to decide for themselves what they want to do as a result of the trauma that they may have by the church and whatnot. And, I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for myself. But that would be my thing. But ultimately, like you said, I think that everyone has to figure it out for themselves what they want to do with what has been given to them. Whether it is best for them to leave. It hurts me when people leave the church because I feel like the church has so much good to offer, and I'm not saying that there's not a lot of bad things that are going on. Like there are, but there's not going to be that perfect place, everywhere because as human beings we're imperfect and we live in an imperfect world. But I would hope that we're able to live by this kingdom now theology of trying to make this world better, as it is in heaven. And so that would be my challenge is to be able to do that. But Mindy, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for having these conversations with us, for being vulnerable. And, I'm sure a lot of us out here are really grateful for that. Can we give it up for her one more time? I know that she provided a lot of good stuff, a lot of good help. Again, if you guys, feel the need to go to the CTC, go out there, take a picture of this. This is just a good resource for you guys to take advantage of. It'd be great if you guys feel like you guys need the help. The resources are here on campus to be able to help you out as best as you can. or best as they can. And so thank you so much, Mindy. Thank you guys so much for joining us out here. And you guys get to see my playlist real quick. But have a good one, y'all. Take care, actually.